Welcome to the Conquer Your Battlefield podcast, where we come together to discuss some of the more significant struggles and metaphorical battlefields that we've faced along our journeys and share some insight on how we've conquered them. I'm JD McGibney, and today I'll be chatting with a woman who has taken the trauma she went through in her childhood and steered herself towards a life and a career of helping others conquer their mental health struggles. A woman brave enough to share her own experiences through her memoir, The Darkness Within, which is available through Amazon.com, and I'll have a link for that in the description of this video, in order to give herself strength and let others know that they are not alone. Today, my guest is author and mental health professional, Drew Paige. How are you doing today, Drew?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's a beautiful sunny day in LA.
And it's actually sunny in Chicago, which is shocking because it's not sunny a lot here. So that's great. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Cherish that sunny day, that sunny Chicago day.
I definitely am.
Today, we're going to be talking about abuse. Now, this is a very heavy topic that we're going to be talking about. So a heads up, there might be some significant emotional triggers ahead in this discussion. To give an exact definition, abuse is to treat a person or animal with cruelty or violence, especially regularly or repeatedly. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, 1 in every 3 women and 1 in every 4 men experiences some form of physical violence from an intimate partner. And according to the Center for Family Justice, 1 in every 4 women and 1 in every 6 men are sexually abused in their lifetime. In cases of child abuse, according to the Children's Advocacy Center of Tennessee, roughly 700,000 children are abused in the United States every single year, of which 1 out of every 10 is sexually abused before they're 18. 90% of all abused children in the United States know their abusers as well, and nearly 1,700 children die each year from abuse. Drew, having spoken to you in private and having read the first chapter of your memoir, The Darkness Within, you've been very open about the violence that you've experienced at the hands of your father. Now, that level of trauma and fear is a heavy weight to bear, regardless of any age. Yes. How do you feel that changed you and guided your growth as you were entering such a pivotal and important age of development and self-discovery?
That is such a wonderful question. That chapter, The Night That Changed Everything, and when I was 14 years old, when my father brutalized me, that event really triggered mental illness I never knew I had. So everybody is predispositioned to mental illness. And for me, after that happened, I never was the same. And even prior to that, 8 years old, the abuse started when my dad started verbally abusing me, calling me crazy, an asshole, all of these different things. So I was getting all of these, thoughts and feelings from my father that were changing my self-confidence, my self-esteem, and the outlook of myself. So it really affected my growth.
It's interesting that you say that people, everyone's predisposition to like some sort of like mental health, issue.
Yes.
Do you feel, looking back now that you're, an adult at this point, do you feel that you as a person might have gone down do you feel that you as a person might have developed something had you not had that verbal and physical abuse from your father?
Well, that's interesting. So you're asking amazing questions. Through all the research that I did for my memoir, if that incident never would have happened, I never would have had a mental illness. And because of the deep trauma I experienced, my father beating me to the point of, almost killing me, choking me. I was blue in the face and I said to him, "You are killing me. Please get off of me." And if that never would have happened, I never would have had what I had. Would I have had anxiety? Sure. I mean, I could, there are a lot of things going on. Yes. But the deep, mental torment that I've had for 45 years, that would have not been there. No.
I mean, it's definitely, it's just reading that it's to say it was a traumatic experience. I think doesn't even like properly capture what it is that you went through.
Yeah.
So like the fact that like talking to you now and like having talked to you, the past like couple weeks, couple months at this point, just like
Uh-huh.
casually through social media, like you're a very, you know, kind, very open person. You're very personable. Like just to see that you've become such a wonderful, human being, I think speaks volumes for like who you are as a person. So I just want to, right off the bat, kind of commend you for being you.
Well, that means a lot to me, like everything to me, because honestly, I don't see myself outside of myself. I wear a mask, so to speak, when it comes to vulnerability. And, the people in my life don't know about the abuse that I experienced, and they don't know about my diagnosis of bipolar 2 disorder. So I'm more open with strangers than I am people in my own life. And I think through helping other people, being a mental health professional and writing this book and working in foster care for 13 years, it helps shape me and heal me to have the empathy to be a better person. So thank you so much. That really means a lot, because in all honesty, I don't see myself like that. So that's interesting when people compliment. It means a lot.
Well, you're very welcome. It's hard to see the forest for the trees, as they say, when like you're so ingrained in like your own everyday life. Like you kind of just you see what it is that you're focusing on, like, in the moment. So like seeing like the bigger picture as like an outside perspective it's really like difficult for anyone.
It
Um,
is.
you had mentioned that you feel more comfortable talking to strangers and like being more vulnerable with strangers as opposed to people who are like closer to you, like friends,
Yes.
family, and whatnot. Um, has that always been a thing for you?
I believe it or not. So I wrote my book last year. It was published, and I started an Instagram page, Drew Paige _author. And I started posting about trauma and about mental health through art images. And then dialogue underneath the artwork. And so people started direct messaging me and really talking about trauma. And it was the first time in my life I had openly talked about my trauma. So to answer your question, yes, this is the first. I've never done this before. I've never openly discussed my mental health and trauma other than strangers. Yeah, it's been remarkable this year.
So the past year and like the writing of your memoir is the first time you ever opened up about this, like, at all, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, obviously my husband knows about my mental health, um, and my direct family. Some people know, and I just told, some friends that I've had my whole life this year, what happened to me. And the response was crying. They never knew, because I was just this social being who always seemed okay.
It's so sad too, because like so many people who are abused, right, as children, by their parents, their relatives, like,
Yeah.
what have you. It's like they don't talk about it, and I
No.
think there's this sense of fear from like retaliation from the person that's abusing you, but also like if you're young enough and it begins, like you're just trained that like, okay, this is just how things are. And it sounds like, your father started verbally abusing you when you're like, you said 8, I think. And
Yeah. And go
it's
ahead.
it's such a for lack of a better term, it's such an innocent time, such an innocent
It,
age. You literally don't know anything because you're just like, oh, I'm learning to like take in data at this point. So the data you're being fed is this. You're like, oh, well, this is just normal. So then you kind of like
yep.
get conditioned to, the point where like you are physically abused. It's just like, oh, this is just the next stage in the course that's
Yes.
been leading up to it. So like it's crazy that it's like we just are taught to accept these things, and then talking about it becomes so difficult because we're just so used to not doing so. And then we're also taught to
Right.
like fear that repercussion of more physical violence.
And it wasn't even for me the fear of the physical violence, and it was basically a generational thing for me. So when I was growing up, things that happened in the house stayed in the house, and that is how I grew up. You know, you didn't discuss what went on in the house, and that's why I never said anything. I also didn't want people to know what I was going through, because I never, want people to feel bad for me, if that makes sense. When I posted a video today on my Instagram page about how I've been feeling depressed this past week. And when people say, I hope that you feel better, I'm here for you, that's amazing. I love the support. It feels good. But at the same time, I'm like, is this Paige a pity party? Like, I don't want this to be a misery memoir situation. That's not, so it's so loaded for me.
I totally understand that whole that perspective on like how you're feeling with that, because I feel like there's a fine line in feeling like you don't want to be a burden, when the truth is we're never actually a burden to anyone for feeling how we feel. But like,
right,
when it, just speaking from personal experience, and it sounds like you have the same thing where like you share how you're feeling if you're not feeling 100%. And it's like, oh, I feel bad for letting people know I don't feel 100%. When it's like, you're a human being. You have emotions. You go up, you go down. It is what it is, and holding on to the good is just as bad as holding on to the bad, not letting it out. We just have to let out our emotions because we are, in fact, emotional creatures. So sharing how you feel, and I saw the post that you're talking about, you, and from what I saw, you weren't asking for pity. You're just like, I feel this way. And like, you're open about the fact that you have bipolar 2. So it's like, oh, this is just part of having bipolar 2. This is part of like, what I'm going through. This is my adventure, quote unquote. And there's no reason. You're not asking for pity. You're just like, well, this is how I feel today. And you're like, I hope everyone else is doing good, just live your life. It's, I think being honest is the important thing, in all of us, when we're like, we have these emotions, we have these experiences, we have these mental health struggles, and being open and clear about what we're going through helps in that fight against ending the stigma. It's like, we don't always have to be 100% all the time, because that is physically, naturally impossible. Whether you're a human, whether you're a dog, whether you're like, a fucking like plant, you can't be 100% all the time. So
you can't.
I think acknowledging that, and I think the fact that you're starting to, open up yourself and you're adding to the conversation, you're sharing what you went through in this memoir is doing a lot of people a lot of good, because you're showing, hey, I'm not afraid to open up about what I'm feeling, and you're letting people know that they're not alone in feeling the way that they feel.
Yeah. And I think when I wrote this memoir, like, I am just a no bullshit person, period. So the way I write is the way I speak, and it's very raw. And sometimes in the book, it's very uncomfortable. This conversation we're having about abuse, I think talking about what happened to me and the layers of it are so important, because, abuse started at 8 years old. And as it continued, when I was 12, my dad would slap me in the face, and most of the time when no one was around. And then when I was 14, I was home alone, and he came home. Everyone else was out of the house. My mom was across the street at the neighbors, and my dad came home to get tomato juice. And I had a big mouth. I was grounded for a change. And he was like, who drank all the tomato juice? And I was like, me. And he was like, you're an asshole. Why would you drink that? And that's what started it. Cause I was like, fuck you. I did. And then it just, my dad, he's 6'1", over 200 pounds. At the time I was 100 pounds, 5'4". And he just, chased me to the stairs, and then he punched me out, and I blacked out. And I just remember coming to, and he was standing over me. And he grabbed my hair, pulled me up the stairs, and just beat me to a pulp for the next hour and a half. And I just remember thinking, you know, I just couldn't believe it was happening. So as I talk about it, either I'm disassociating and fine, or I'm reliving it as I am right now, which is hard.
I mean, it's, again, I can't even imagine what it was like for you to be in that moment. And for the fact that like it lasted so long. Like I just read the first chapter, and reading it, it's only a few pages, but like it
Yeah.
felt like a lifetime just reading the experience. And the fact that like you're reiterating right now that it was over an hour that this went on, like that, like the amount of trauma that went along with that. Like again, the fact that you are as kind and like giving and so outwardly focused on making the world a better place after what you went through, again, it speaks volumes for who you are as a person, and it should 100% be commended.
Thank you. And the layers of that just continue. You know, when I was 16, I got a nose job. It's the rite of passage for a Jewish girl.
Mazel
That
tov.
was, thank you. That was supposed to be funny. It was ridiculous. But my father, after I got my nose job, started covertly sexualizing me. And I never understood, because I never was touched sexually, that he was sexually abusing me on top of the other abuse. And so I never spoke of it. And it wasn't until I did the research for this book, and when I went to therapy, you know, a therapist told me I had been sexualized and molested. I didn't really buy it at first. And then, so that was another layer of my abuse. So it's just, there's so many layers to everything I've been through in my life.
It's kind of dissecting what like goes on in, especially like our early lives, our early childhood, can be difficult because sometimes, like we don't recall things with exact detail depending on like what was going on and like the level of trauma associated with it, or like what it is that we were focused on. If we were focused on like hyper focused on like one thing, we might not have noticed like other things that were going on around it that were like, oh wait, like this is also a thing which led to X, Y, and Z because of A, B, and C.
Yeah.
And also like when it comes to emotional abuses, kind of like sometimes it could be difficult to figure out exactly what's going on, because we also have to take into account like intention and like what is actually being said. If something's like not directly said, or if something's being inferred, it's just like, but it definitely sounds like your father 100% was doing everything that like he should not have been doing.
Correct. And my father, growing up, was abused severely. So, abuse follows abuse most times. And, there is an empathy I have for my father, the abuse that he experienced. And I understand, which is very fucked up, why he did what he did to me. And then what's even more bizarre for me
is
understanding
something is not the same as condoning something.
I don't condone at all, but the understanding and having empathy and forgiveness, it has been part of my journey, because I couldn't live in anger anymore.
You can't.
I couldn't. No. And for years, I was sitting in rage, in my young 20s. And it wasn't helpful for me. It was toxic. So I just...
Well, I remember when we were talking in private, you had mentioned that because of what your father had done physically and emotionally, that you found it difficult to open up, especially to men, like romantic partners.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, from the time, there's journal entries from when I was 10 years old about my obsession with boys and just needing not validation, because I've never, and this is what's so interesting, I've never been the girl to be needy and wanting a boyfriend in terms of like needing attention. What I wanted was just a guy in my life. It was different. I was kind of the quote unquote guy. I was the one in power, so to speak. I was always in control, but I never opened up vulnerably. And as I got older, in college, I would use guys sexually, and there was a wall always. And then I started experiencing hypomania, which I never understood. I got so much attention from guys that my sophomore year of college, I cut all of my hair off to stop getting attention. And it worked. I mean, guys still found me attractive, but that was my way of being invisible. And so as I got older, obviously my hair grew back, and then it was a whole different layer with men. I really didn't want men to know me, so I would always ask them questions and please them, and obviously be pleased. It was very, they thought they were close to me, but they were never close to me.
Well, it's the more the people, the more you make someone feel comfortable talking to you, and you ask them questions and kind of lead the conversation about them, the more someone's going to feel comfortable with you. And, that is very much a thing. I will jump in and say that I am very much guilty of doing the same exact thing with almost everybody, whether it's like a romantic partner, just friends, acquaintances. Like I also have difficulties just opening up in general, which is something that I have recently, within the past like few years, started working on. But I have very much focused on getting to know people and making them feel comfortable and wanting to open up without actually, letting people in. So I 100% understand exactly what it is that you were going through and doing.
But what's interesting is, and this is really interesting, I've always had connective relationships with men and women, and I'm not sitting here saying I've never had an intimate connection, like in vulnerability. I have had many experiences in my life, with friends that are guys and with romantic partners, that there was that deep intimacy, but
there is there's that roadblock at like a certain point. You're like, no one goes past here.
Oh no. Yeah. Until I met my husband when I was 25. And then, we had gone to high school together, never dated, always were at the same parties. And we always thought each other were great looking and fun and whatever. And so he asked me on a date, and I said yes. And then my sister sent me up on another date. This is actually in my book. And it was with a guy who literally like hit every checkbox. He was kind. He looked great. All these different things. And I almost got date raped on that date. He brought me to a coffee shop, and I was very free-spirited, and there was so much chemistry. He started kissing me at the coffee shop. I was like, okay. So then he's like, let's go somewhere else. So I thought we were going to go to a club or whatever. So he brought me to a parking garage, and he wouldn't let me out of the car. And so I screamed at the top of my lungs, and then I finally got out. But that was before I met my husband. So I blew off my husband's date. And then my husband called me 3 weeks later and asked me out again. And then on that date, we just purely connected. And that was the first man I've ever been 100% vulnerable with, ever.
It's crazy that like you have people that are able to like be quote unquote normal and then do like, or like almost come through with like doing these horrific things. And it's just like,
I know.
Oh, man, I'm very glad that like you ended up not with that guy.
I know, it was surreal. And what's interesting is, which is so interesting, as that was happening, I was thinking of my father and that trauma. It was all connected. And I'm like, well, add it to the book of another layer of trauma. I was just grateful that I had the strength within me to scream and just get out. And I really am. It could have turned out very differently that night.
Well, I am also very thankful that you were strong enough to get out of that situation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I just want to double back and bring up something that you had actually mentioned earlier in the conversation, where you said that the mentality at in your family's home was that whatever happens in the house stayed in the house. I think that's interesting that was the mentality when you were growing up, yet you went down a path that led you into a career that literally was helping people with like their mental health and doing social work. And I'm assuming dealing with people who were doing the same thing, keeping things in, and you were encouraging them to like open up. So how do you feel that whoops, I'm dropping stuff. How do you feel that mentality guided you towards your career?
That's a good question. I think it guided me as an outlet to use other people's voices to heal my own.
Interesting.
It's a very powerful statement. Working, in mental health, and this is before I knew I had any diagnosis. I was diagnosed at 30. My first job out of college, I was a psychiatric residential service coordinator, which is the same thing as a mental health professional, but it was working with people with deep mental illness, like schizophrenia, bipolar 1 disorder, delusional disorder, you name it. I worked with it. And in working with people who had such severe mental issues, it really was guiding me without me realizing it was guiding me into a field of healing people to heal myself without having to talk about what I went through. And then working in foster care on the south side and west side of Chicago, taking abused and neglected children out of these homes, I always thought to myself, well, holy shit. I mean, my abuse is nothing compared to these kids. But at the same time, again, I was healing other people, and this time children, from abuse and neglect. And that was it was an outlet. I always knew I wanted to help people, even when I was a little girl. So it was just in me. But after the abuse, I just knew I wanted to heal myself through others.
I have an interesting question that I want to ask you now. Do you feel that helping those other people was enough to heal yourself, or do you think that you would still have leftover issues had you not begun to actually open up about what you went through?
I'm going to say something very triggering. If I didn't help those people, I would not be alive. Because I helped those people, it kept me alive. Because, I had such dark, depressive feelings, again, which I never told anybody. I've never been hospitalized. I've never had an assessment evaluation to go to a hospital. The only time that happened is when I had postpartum depression. But again, I didn't go to a hospital. My point of saying that is I have such an act I put on that I don't go deep and delve into these dark feelings. So without that, I wouldn't be here.
So you're saying that you taking the feelings that you were feeling and channeling it towards this avenue gave you the outlet, the release that you needed in order to bring light into the world.
Yes.
Also, I just want to pause and say that, I've only known you for a short period of time, but I am very grateful that you are still here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. It's, I've had a couple of times in my life where, again, I didn't feel like there was any hope. 5 years ago, I was standing on the ravine by my house and I was ready to jump. It's in my book and I chose to live. It's not an option. But days like today, I don't feel suicidal. I haven't felt that way since 5 years ago, but it's very hard to deal with depression when it creeps because you're okay and then you're not.
You know,
So
it's a heavy weight regardless of, when you are, where you are, who you are. Depression is not easy, and it's an intense feeling.
the darkness. That's why I
Yeah.
called my book that. It's the darkness within. It's like the like the Death Eaters in Harry Potter or whatever those were. What were they? The Dementors? What were they
The
called?
Dementors, the flying wraithy things.
Yeah, it's like that's how it feels to be depressed. It's like it sucks all your happiness out, and I really reference that because it that image is perfect for the feelings. But I think also a reason why I bring light to these topics is because it's so taboo to talk about, and just because you're feeling the dark feelings, it's never an option, to commit suicide and not be here anymore. The option is to work through the pain because that's life. And you're leaving behind, it's like mass murder. So many people are pained and because of the actions that you took.
It's the idea. Suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary feeling. Though having depression or having bipolar 1 or 2, dealing with those things is an ongoing thing.
Correct.
It could be a lifelong thing. It could be a
It's
year-long thing.
torturous. Yeah.
But it's not just a constant feeling of like utter doom all the time. There are waves, no. There's ups and downs. So correct. Again, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary feeling, correct. Regardless of what you're going through.
Yeah.
And like you just pointed out, like if someone does take their own life, it's not just that one person who is affected, it's everybody. But again, it's like the person who is incentivized to do that because of what they're going through is obviously going through a significant amount of pain and suffering that, again, if we have these conversations more openly, it might prevent more people from actually following through with that. So
right. It's all about, I think it's about talking about it, but I also think it's about talking to the people who are feeling this way, and this sounds, calling a hotline is wonderful. I really believe in that, but I feel like certain people, just connecting with, believe it or not, strangers, sometimes just an outside source to really just talk about the emotions you're having.
Because you might just find a complete stranger who just happens to know exactly what you're going through because they are going through the same thing yourselves. Because what are the odds that like your brother, sister, cousin, mom, dad, aunt, uncle are feeling the same exact thing that you're going through? You might have genetically genetically linked like depression or anxiety or something. You might get that, but even though it's not going to be the same exact thing, so it's really hard to open up. And even if you do have that, you have that you have like the bias of like, this person is someone who I'm living with, so it's like you also have like, okay, we understand each other, but at the same time we have a lot of friction because we are going through the same things. We don't have that ability to like disconnect for a little bit and like have that separation before we can come back and communicate. So like you said, like you're able to communicate with strangers more easily because you don't have that added friction of, oh, you're part of the reason why I'm focused on this thing that is upsetting me. It's just like, oh, I just met Ted, or I just met Phyllis, and they just happen to understand what I'm going through, and we can kind of vent to each other and release that built up pressure because we don't have that added bias as well.
True. And also therapists. Like, I'm a huge believer in therapy. I mean, I've been in therapy since I was 14 years old. I'm not in it at the moment, but when I was writing the book, I was doing this eye movement desensitization therapy, and it just helps you delve into your trauma. I've also done dialectical behavior therapy where
what is like the eye movement therapy? I'm not familiar with that.
So basically it's a therapy where you have a specialist therapist, and you talk about, so for example, the trauma with my dad that one night.
Mhm.
So she asked me details about that night, and then we pause, and then she does this thing with her finger back and forth. And as she's doing that, the patient focuses on her finger or on the therapist's finger, and then it brings back the feelings of the trauma and what you're going through. So it helps your brain rewire to stop living in the trauma. So instead of replaying it in my mind every single day, it's stopped that for me, unless I'm discussing it.
Interesting. So it's giving you a physical stimuli that's simple enough for you to recall the details, but stay focused on the thing that you're doing.
True.
And bring you out of the moment.
It permanently changes the chemistry in your brain.
Interesting.
But I did it for a year. I mean, you can't just do it once or twice.
Yeah. You gotta train yourself to, go rewire the, several decades of, what it has learned. Totally get that.
Yeah. So that was an intensive therapy, different outlets of therapy is huge for trauma. It's huge.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate for everybody going to therapy, at least, once in their lives. Cause it's like, in my opinion, it's like just going to get like a physical, every like 6 months to a year to be like, oh yeah, let me check up on this. Like, your mental health, your brain, the way you process the world around you is just as important as how like your body is processing the food you're putting into your body, or how like your heart's pumping the blood throughout your body. You gotta make sure that everything is working, up to par. And I think I'm very happy to see that like a lot more people are open to talking about what it is that they're going through, or the fact that they are going to see a therapist. Like there's absolutely nothing wrong with going to see a therapist.
Right.
No,
like
it's true. People that like I've grown up with, people that I've known since since childhood or like junior high, high school, people that I've met that are still within like my age bracket, they're a lot more open about it. Like I personally started going to see a therapist for the first time in my life about a year and a half ago. Just because I grew up with, parents that had a very old school mentality. You don't talk about how you're feeling. You don't talk about any like the negative stuff. You just get angry and, that's how you deal with it. So like I was always, let's talk, I was always like, hey, I'll be there to help you. Tell me what you're going through. Share your, don't hang on to this. But I myself was not doing that because I didn't know how to. I didn't feel comfortable doing so up until
because you were taught to do that. You were,
And then I think it's interesting now that like I can talk to friends, I can talk to like acquaintances, I can talk to peers, like associates, even just like other family members. But like like my grandmother who's like 89, like I told her that like I'm going to therapy, and she like her initial reaction was like something of like, oh, you need a therapist, blah blah. And it's just like I think everyone needs a therapist because it's just like going to like seeing like a doctor for a physical, and like me explaining to her that way, like the light bulb went off, which is like, oh, I never thought of it that way.
It's a generational thing too.
Yeah, sure. But she's like 100% like supportive of me going to see a therapist, like especially since like I explained to her like it's important, and she's like, oh, you know what, you should totally do this because obviously my grandma loves me and wants me to be okay. But like I think she still is just getting used to the idea of me talking so openly about it. Like we'll have like company over and I'll be like, oh yeah, I got therapy on this day, like, on this day or whatever. And she'll have the initial reaction of like, oh, you can't talk about it. But now she's starting to just be like, oh, okay, whatever.
I think it's great. I think it's great you're going, and I think it's really good that you're processing your emotions. It's so important. It really is.
And well, thank you. Thank you very much. Like I said, I think that the more we talk about these topics in general, the more we talk about the fact that we're just going to see a doctor, like we talk about like, oh, I have like a doctor's appointment, or I'm getting like shoulder surgery. Like people are like, yeah, whatever, I got my hip replaced, or I got cataracts removed. It's like you should have that same level of casualty when it comes to just talking about going to see like a mental health therapist or like any kind of professional.
Everybody seems very quote unquote open, but the truth is having a month to talk about mental health awareness. People who struggle with mental health struggles, it's an everyday struggle, so it's so much deeper. And that's why I want my book to be turned into a film. And I've been working on that for a year. So I've been working with the screenwriter, and I'm hoping, this comes to fruition, because the truth is, I've maybe seen one or two movies that, represent mental illness correctly. And I can say that because I not only have one, but I worked with the mentally ill for, half my career. So the stigma needs to change on how it looks.
I agree. This is nowhere near like a serious thing, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Marvel TV show Moon Knight, which is it's the newest Marvel show. But the character himself, when he was not like super popular when he came out, like originally, and like they made the TV show, but the character has split personality disorder.
Oh,
and he is a superhero. So like, I very much appreciate the fact that Marvel has had this character for decades, and like they're finally putting him in the forefront and giving him they gave him his own TV show. And like, we're seeing someone who is struggling and is dealing with this, but it's not spun in a negative way. Like, obviously he's struggling because there's multiple personalities in one body, but like the way it's packaged and delivered, it's like, oh, we can relate to this character having these struggles. We can relate to both personalities having these struggles, but at the same time, he's like, the character is overcoming that in order to, give back to the world in a positive light. And he is literally a superhero saving the world with
kind of amazing.
Split personality disorder. So I appreciate the fact that we have something like that in pop culture now, where it's like, this is a significant mental illness, but this person is overcoming all that. And we're seeing the struggle that person is going through in order to still rise above in the heat of the moment and still be a good person.
I agree. I'm so curious to see how that's portrayed. I'm going to have to watch and see if it really, how they put that on film, because that's really what I strive for, is that to be how it is actually, how these people with these disorders actually behave. So I'm curious, but I think it's wonderful they're putting that in pop culture.
I also just highly recommend it, because I think Marvel is like phenomenal at like building the universe that they've built. Especially in like the cinematic. Incredible.
Yeah.
And
for sure.
And even like with a bunch of the other like Marvel characters, I very much appreciate the fact that you're able to they humanize everybody. It's not just like, oh, it's Superman who's literally indestructible except for like his allergic reaction to like The Rock. Whereas like in the comic books, Tony Stark, Iron Man, is an alcoholic, and we follow along with his struggles with that. And like in the movies, he's got severe like anxiety disorder. Like, then that's like the driving force behind a lot of the things that he does. And like, literally every time he fucks up in any of the movies, it's because he's dealing with like anxiety and depression. And it's just like, oh shit. And then he realizes what happened, and then he works through everything. We see that process, and we see him overcome that to like take responsibility for what he did.
Yeah.
And then move forward and like change and like save the world and be a superhero. But like, we're seeing, the struggles of like, mental health that people go through every day, that people can relate to. And I think that is a big part of the change in the conversation. Is like, we're starting to see like the media portray mental illness in a different way. It's not just people who are mentally ill are the bad guys.
No, it's huge. And they're the movie Girl Interrupted, Prozac Nation, The Glass Castle, all of these films portray mental illness and health in a way that it's dead on. It's very realistic. And I like how it does not shy away from the reality of the dark side of mental health. That is what changes the conversation about mental health and illness, for sure.
Yeah. And it shows that like, you can have like that duality of people, where you can have a good person who is dealing with this darkness. It's not that person is going to be like sunshine and rainbows all the time. And like, they're going to feel this way. They're going to have these emotions. They're going to have, negative emotional outbursts. Like, say they're just going to be depressed. They're going to cry. They're going to snap at something and just like yell, and, they'll catch themselves and be like, I am sorry, I'm dealing with A, B, and C,
Right.
And I think also having these conversations and acknowledging that, hey, that's a thing that people go through will eventually lead down the path where it's like people are taught to talk and share. This way you don't have that buildup. This way you don't have people, sharing that chain of abusing their children, abusing their family, abusing their, romantic partners. You get rid of that whole abuse because you have that emotional valve built in by people sharing what they're going through and talking about it, as opposed to just exploding and, beating their kids.
It's true. And what's so unbelievable is I broke the cycle,
You did.
I did. I have 2 kids. I would never, I am a good mom. I married a man who is the complete opposite of my father. And it's just remarkable how in my life, I didn't repeat the cycle. It's shocking. And honestly, like, I dated one man who wasn't very nice, but I've never, dated a full-blown abuser, which is shocking considering what I've been through. But again, it makes sense because I was always in control.
Well, you seem the kind of person who has a very strong like personality, and like I just knowing you for the short time that I know you, I don't think I could ever see you being in a relationship where you were like, you just let someone like put you into that position. You just seem like the kind of person who would like, if someone ever hit you, you'd like punch him back in like 2 seconds and knock him out.
I wouldn't punch him back. I would run. I have a lot of talk, but I would definitely never see them again. And yeah, but I always had that feeling inside of myself. I'm a people reader. So if there was something that felt dangerous or yucky or unsafe, I always got away from it. I never ran to it, which is also shocking because I have, a side of me that was a little bit self-destructive. So that was, I'm grateful for that.
Well, I am, as an outside observer, I'm grateful that you have gotten yourself away from those situations as well and led yourself to be here in the position that you are, giving back in a positive light.
Yeah, I'm excited what the years are going to bring with this memoir. I'm hoping, more conversations like this. I'm so grateful you had me here because, this is the beginning. It's the beginning of a conversation that's not the norm. And that's what people need.
This needs to be part of the norm because it's more normal, as we went through with all the statistics, that it's more normal than it really should be. Like the level of abuse that's out there. And I think, again, having these kind of conversations will help alleviate those statistics of abuse because you'll have people having the necessary emotional release that is done in a healthy manner as opposed to, striking out against their loved ones.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a process. It really is. And it's a process for me every day. And I'm grateful that I can teach my kids, just be kind and empathetic to people because you never know what they're going through.
That is extremely true. And, like you said, you opened up recently to friends that you've had for your entire life that had no idea what you were going through.
No idea. None. I just opened up to my best guy friend who I've known since I was 14 years old. And he could not have been more kind, empathetic, and lovely. And this is a guy who has always held a special place in my heart. He's a remarkable human being. And I was just so grateful that my fear he would think differently of me. And he just cared about me just the same. So it's friendships like that are forever. So it really meant a lot to me.
Yeah, it's important. I want to point out that like we are not our illnesses, we are not our struggles, we are not our traumas. Unfortunately, if we have dealt with them, are dealing with them, it's something that we have gone through and are going through, but they do not define us. And anyone who is worthwhile having in our lives will understand that 100%.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like this guy is like exactly one of those.
He is, and he's always been such an incredible person. And I really have always been so grateful for our friendship. And I just don't think he understands the depths of how much that meant to me. But he was also he's always been a special person. So I didn't doubt it. It's just, I'm just grateful.
You just have to build up that confidence in yourself to open up. And sometimes it takes time. But
yeah,
I
it
am
does.
very
And I even
happy.
gave my book, which is, it's wild, but I took a chance and he was wonderful.
Oh, well, I'm very glad to hear that built up that courage to actually open up to him,
Thank
that
you.
way. You're
It
welcome.
meant a lot. Yeah, it was a big deal.
Well, Drew, thank you so much for being here. And thank you so
Thank
much for taking the time to chat today. And I know, opening up like this is not easy whatsoever. So I'm extremely appreciative that you're
you.
doing so, on the show, on the podcast, and sharing what it is that you went through to, potentially help other people, let them know that,
Yeah,
it's okay to open up and tell people what's going on. So hopefully, this is able to like help somebody get through their own traumas and their own struggles.
I really hope so. And I am so honored that you took the time to talk to me. And you're such a kind soul. You're a good man. And I'm just grateful that you made the space safe for me to feel comfortable talking today. So thank you.
You're very welcome. It is very much my pleasure. Uh,
Thank
I I truly believe that the more that we as a society feel comfortable opening up about our struggles, the more it will help others to realize that they are not alone. Everyone has the inner strength to face whatever life puts along their path. So thank you again for taking the time to chat, and thank you to everyone that has tuned in to this episode. If anyone watching finds that they are struggling with their mental health, please do not be afraid to reach out to your friends, family, or a mental health professional. I'll place a link in the description of this video that will have some information in connection to further resources. And until next time, remember, you always have the strength to conquer your battlefield.